The man on the bench was Judge Albright, my father's old tennis partner and a figure of absolute control in his courtroom. But right now, all that control was gone. He stared at the document in his hand, his face waxy and pale under the fluorescent lights. His eyes, wide with a terror I had never seen, flickered from the paper to me, and then to my father. He mouthed a name before he whispered it, a choked, strangled sound that barely carried. Valkyrie. It was an invocation, a word of forbidden power in a place that should never have heard it. My father's smug smile, the one he'd worn all morning, just dissolved. The judge's hand shook, and the gavel slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor with a sound that felt like a crack in the foundation of the world. It had all started 2 months earlier, in a lawyer's office that smelled of old leather and older money. We were there for a pre-trial mediation regarding my late mother's will. I sat across the polished mahogany table from my father, Edward, a retired diplomat who valued his public legacy above all else. He was petitioning the court to remove me as co-executor of the estate. The reason he gave the mediator was simple, and it was the same story he'd told for years. My life, my career, was a disappointment he simply could not abide. "She has a glorified clerical job for the government," he announced to the room, waving his hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. I felt the familiar cold weight settle in my stomach. It was the same tone he used when I didn't get into his preferred university, the same condescending pity he offered when I took a government job instead of a prestigious corporate one. "No title, no prestige," he continued. "She can't be trusted with a legacy." I just sat there, my hands folded calmly on the table, but inside, a quiet calculation began. He saw a clerk, a ghost, a footnote in his grand story. He had no idea. That's when he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur meant for the whole room to hear. "Frankly," he said, a sly grin spreading across his face, "my old friend, Judge Albright has already assured me the court will see things my way." He winked then. A single, arrogant gesture that sealed my fate with his corruption. He wasn't just insulting me anymore. This was a threat. He was openly declaring that the system was rigged, that his power extended even to the bench, and that my voice had no weight against the word of a judge who was already in his pocket. He chuckled, convinced his power was absolute. He had no idea he'd just weaponized his corruption against the one person whose security clearance gave her a direct line to the Department of Justice. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. To my family, I was a ghost. Not in a mysterious, intriguing way, but in a way that meant I was simply not quite there. My life was a vague sketch they never bothered to fill in. It was easier that way. For a long time, I told myself that keeping my 2 worlds separate was a professional necessity, a matter of national security, but the deeper truth was that it was an act of emotional self-preservation. One world was for them, a carefully curated fiction of mediocrity. The other world, the real one, was for me. A place where my voice wasn't just heard, but where it commanded the silence of others. I remember the night my brother made partner at his law firm. My father, Edward, a retired State Department official whose entire identity was built on the polished veneer of success, booked the most expensive restaurant in the city. He stood to give a toast, his voice booming with a pride I had never once heard directed at me. "To my son," he'd declared, raising his glass, "a man building a real legacy, something tangible, something important." I watched my brother soak in the praise, his smile effortless. It was a scene I knew by heart, the latest installment in a long-running series. I didn't just see the toast, I saw the brand new car for his 16th birthday, the down payment for his first condo, the endless stream of encouragement for a path that was clear, visible, and, most importantly, impressive to my father's friends. Just a week later, I tried to share a piece of my own news. I'd been appointed lead analyst for a critical new project, a promotion in everything but name. I found my father in his study, and for a moment, I thought he was actually listening. But then came the familiar, patronizing pat on my hand. "That's nice, dear," he said, his eyes already drifting back to his paperwork. "Just try to find a stable position soon, all right? Stability, To him, my career was a flighty, temporary thing. He even gave me a nickname, the Ghost. He thought it was a clever joke about my quiet nature and my refusal to discuss the boring details of my government job. He didn't understand that the reason I was a ghost in his house was because I was a person of substance somewhere else. My father's entire world was built on perception. His self-worth was a direct reflection of the public, measurable success of his children. My brother was a shining mirror for him. I was a frustrating fog, and this worldview was enabled by men like his friend, Judge Albright, a man who moved through life with the unshakable belief that his authority and the authority of men like my father was absolute and unquestionable. They saw the world as a club, and I simply wasn't a member. What they couldn't possibly comprehend was that my world wasn't a club. It was a fortress, and from within its walls, I saw everything. The shift from their world to mine was like stepping through a portal. One moment I was in the warm, cluttered world of family judgment. The next I was in the cold, sterile silence of a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility. No windows, no decorations, just the low constant hum of servers and the chilled recycled air. It was a place outside of time, a concrete box where the fate of nations could be decided by the flicker of a cursor on a screen. Here, I wasn't the ghost. Here, I had a different name. The room was filled with professionals, people who lived and breathed dedication. Their faces were etched with focus, their respect earned not through titles or family names, but through sheer competence. At the head of the conference table sat General Marcus Thorne, my commanding officer. A man whose quiet confidence was forged in 3 decades of impossible decisions. He had seen my analysis prevent ambushes, uncover threats, and save countless lives. He never patted my hand or called my work nice. He just listened. He knew my name meant something. I stood before the Global Operations Map, a massive, glowing screen of tactical data. "The asset is compromised," I stated, my voice calm and even, cutting through the silence. "The communication chatter suggests they are closing in. We need to initiate Protocol Nightshade immediately." I pointed to a blinking red icon over a remote mountain range. "My analysis indicates a 98% probability of catastrophic intelligence failure if we wait for the next intercept." There was no debate. No one questioned my judgment or asked for a second opinion. The room was silent, all eyes on the general. He simply looked at me and gave a single, sharp nod. "Execute, Valkyrie." That's all it took. In my father's world, my voice was a whisper. Here, it moved armies. Walking out of that mediation, the city noise faded into a dull hum. The sting of my father's words, the casual corruption in his wink, it all coalesced into something cold and hard in my chest. For years I had played the emotional game by their rules, and I had always lost. But they had just made a critical error. They brought the conflict into a professional arena, and in that arena, I was not their daughter. I was an operator. I made a decision right there on the pavement. This would no longer be a family dispute. It would be treated as a hostile intelligence operation, and the objective was simple: to dismantle their power structure by introducing a variable they could not possibly control. That night, I didn't cry or rage. I went to work. I logged into a secure terminal, the green-on-black text of the Department of Defense Legal Affairs database a familiar comfort. My fingers moved with purpose, navigating firewalls until I found what I was looking for. It was a standard but rarely used protocol. Form 88B, Notification of Civil Litigation Involving Cleared Personnel. As I filled out the fields, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't revenge. This was a correction. I was officially notifying the Pentagon that a case involving a high-level asset was proceeding in open court. More importantly, I was stating that my professional credibility, a matter of national security, was being systematically challenged. The moment I hit submit, their rigged little game was no longer a private affair. The next step was to set the bait. I sent a single name to my lawyer for the witness list, General Marcus Thorne. Then, I requested a formal briefing with the general himself. I walked into his office not as a daughter seeking a favor, but as an asset reporting a potential compromise. I laid out the facts clinically: the lawsuit, the judge's conflict of interest, and my father's attacks on my character. General Thorne listened without interruption, his expression hardening. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice dangerously low. "They are questioning the judgment of an individual with Zulu 5 clearance in open court?" I simply nodded. He stood up, the matter already settled in his mind. "Consider it handled." My lawyer later told me that when my father and Judge Albright saw the witness list, they scoffed. They saw the name and the rank, and just assumed he was some mid-level bureaucrat, one of my department head friends. They were so blinded by their own perceived importance, so convinced of my insignificance, that they couldn't see the tactical maneuver for what it was. They saw a pawn being moved onto the board, completely ignorant of the fact that it was actually a queen. The subpoena was served. My father laughed when he saw the name. He thought he was preparing for a family drama. He had no idea he was about to be cross-examined by the United States military. The federal courtroom was designed to make a person feel small. All dark wood, high ceilings, and an unnerving silence. My father, however, was in his element. He sat on the witness stand, performing the role of a lifetime, the heartbroken, concerned parent. He looked at Judge Albright, his friend, with a practiced expression of sorrow. He was weaving the same narrative he'd perfected over 2 decades, the one where I was the irresponsible, flighty child who simply couldn't get her life together. Every word was a carefully chosen brushstroke in a portrait of my failure, a picture designed for the judge's biased eyes. "She lives in the shadows," my father said, his voice laced with false sadness. "No husband, no community, no accomplishments one can even name." I watched him, my expression unreadable, but inside I tallied his words against the truth. No community? I thought of my team, the silent professionals who trusted me with their lives. No accomplishments? I thought of the redacted reports in my files, of missions that succeeded because of my analysis. He continued, "How can she be trusted with her mother's legacy?" Judge Albright nodded gravely, his face a mask of sympathy. They were 2 powerful men, affirming a shared, convenient fiction. Then my lawyer stood up. "The defense calls its only witness," he said, his voice cutting through the stuffy air. "General Marcus Thorne." A door at the back of the courtroom opened, and the entire atmosphere shifted. General Thorne entered, and it was as if all the oxygen in the room was drawn toward him. His dress uniform was immaculate, the array of ribbons on his chest a silent testament to a life of service and command. He walked with a quiet, unshakable confidence that made the preening lawyers and even the judge seem small and theatrical. The low murmur of the courtroom died instantly. The general took the stand and was sworn in. Judge Albright looked down at him, a hint of his usual condescending authority still lingering. "Please state your name and title for the record, General." General Thorne looked directly at him, his gaze level and firm. "General Marcus Thorne, Commanding General, Joint Special Operations Intelligence Brigade." The judge's pen froze mid-scribble. The title echoed in the silent room. This was not some minor bureaucrat. A flicker of anxiety, of confusion, finally broke through Judge Albright's practiced composure. The power dynamic in his courtroom had just been fundamentally altered, and he knew it. My lawyer let the weight of the title settle before he spoke. "General, can you speak to my client's character and fitness for responsibility?" This was the moment. General Thorne stood up, a breach of protocol that commanded everyone's absolute attention. He did not look at my lawyer. He did not look at the jury. He looked directly at the man on the bench. "Your Honor," he began, his voice not loud, but carrying an authority that filled every corner of the room, "I am not authorized to discuss the specifics of her work. The operational security of my command forbids it, but I can tell you this." He paused, and I could feel my father's confused stare on the side of my face. "For 6 years," the general continued, "she has been the lead strategic analyst for Joint Task Force Spectre. She is the individual who collates our most sensitive intelligence and provides the final threat assessments." He let that sink in. "The President of the United States, on multiple occasions, has made life-or-death decisions, based on the intelligence briefs that she personally prepared and delivered. She bears a weight of responsibility that few people in this country could even imagine. The people in my command, and the intelligence community at large, know her by her operational call sign. Another pause, this one stretching for an eternity. We call her Valkyrie. The name landed in the silent courtroom like a thunderclap. In the back corner, I saw a federal marshal, a man I knew had a background in counterintelligence, involuntarily stiffen his posture. Judge Albright's face drained of all color. He knew the name. It wasn't just a call sign, it was a legend in certain circles, a designation whispered about in classified briefings, a name tied to programs that operated under authorities that superseded his own, or anyone else's in this room. He instantly understood that he hadn't been presiding over a simple family squabble. He had been allowing the public harassment of a protected and extremely vital national asset. As if on cue, the bailiff walked to the bench and handed him a single, sealed, envelope bearing the official letterhead of the Department of Defense. The judge stared at it, then at me. His hand trembled. The gavel, his symbol of power, slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. And I finally turned to look at my father. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the judge, at his friend, his source of absolute power, who was now frozen in sheer, unadulterated terror. In that single moment, my father's entire world collapsed. The daughter he had dismissed, the ghost with no accomplishments, was the one person in the room who held all the real power. His influence, his legacy, his carefully crafted world, it was all meaningless. My father had spent his life collecting powerful friends. In the end, it only took one word to show him that my name carried more weight than all of his combined. The silence after the gavel fell was more profound than any sound. It was a vacuum, pulling all the arrogance and hot air out of the room. Judge Albright, stammering about an unforeseen national security conflict, recused himself so quickly he nearly tripped leaving the bench. My father sat frozen at his table, a statue of disbelief. The courtroom erupted into frantic whispers as the truth, or at least, a shocking, inexplicable version of it, rippled through the crowd. I simply gathered my things, my heart beating a calm, steady rhythm. The storm had broken, but it was their storm, not mine. I walked out of the courthouse and didn't look back. The official consequences were swift and brutal. Within weeks, the Judicial Conduct Committee launched a formal investigation into Judge Albright. His career, built over a lifetime of handshakes and backroom agreements, ended, not with a retirement party, but with a quiet, career-killing censure. His name, once a symbol of power in the city, became a cautionary tale whispered among lawyers. He was erased from the world he had so proudly occupied, a ghost in his own life, a fate he and my father would have once found fitting for me. My father's downfall was more personal, and in many ways more complete. His powerful friends suddenly became very hard to reach. The federal inquiry into conspiracy and perjury hung over him like a shroud, stripping him of the public respect he craved more than air itself. Stripped of his connections and his judicial leverage, he was forced to settle the estate case. I sat in a lawyer's office, the same one where he had dismissed me months earlier, and watched him sign the documents that gave me full control of my mother's legacy. He didn't look at me. His public legacy, the monumental obsession of his entire life, had been shattered by the daughter he never truly saw. 1 year later, I stood looking out a floor-to-ceiling window. The Potomac River flowed below, a calm, steady line of purpose. My world was no longer a windowless concrete box, but this corner office, filled with light. On the polished wood of the door, a simple plaque read, Director, Strategic Analysis. The quiet authority of that title felt more real than any inheritance. There was a soft knock, and General Thorne entered, a warm smile on his face. He'd come by to deliver some news in person. The investigation into Judge Albright had sent shockwaves through the system. Your case triggered a full review by the DoD and the Department of Justice, he told me. They've now implemented new, mandatory protocols for how civil courts must handle proceedings that involve cleared personnel. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, professional respect. Your quiet, procedural move created systemic change. It will protect people like you for decades to come. He nodded toward my new desk. You didn't just win a case, Director. You set a new precedent. His use of my title was deliberate. a final acknowledgement of the world I had mastered. A moment later, my team came in, carrying a slightly lopsided cake with a single candle. They were celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Directorate's founding under my leadership. There were no booming speeches or grand toasts like the ones my father gave for my brother. Instead, there was just quiet laughter, shared stories from recent projects, and a deep, unspoken camaraderie. These people, my fellow analysts, operators, and strategists, were my true family. They were a family built not on the obligations of blood, but on a foundation of mutual trust, shared purpose, and a respect that was earned in silence and proven under pressure. Later that afternoon, sitting at my desk, an email popped up. The sender was my brother. The subject line was a single stark word, Dad. I opened it and read a long, rambling plea. Their father was a broken man, he wrote. The legal fees were overwhelming. He was asking, begging really, for me to use my connections to make it all go away. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. For years they had refused to see my world, and now, in their desperation, it was the only thing they could see. I read the words and I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet, final detachment. Their crisis was a distant signal from a world I no longer inhabited. My peace was no longer tied to their drama or their validation. With a single, calm click, I moved the email to the archive folder and turned my attention back to a classified briefing on my monitor. My father believed a legacy was something you pass down. I learned it's something you build in silence and defend with authority. If you've ever had your voice dismissed by people who couldn't comprehend your world, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.